welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another reading wrap up. I've been trying to do these every 2 months this year, and I am a little behind on this video. This is going to be my May and June reading wrap up, and we are halfway through July right now, so I definitely need to get back on schedule with posting bi-monthly reading wrap-ups because I just enjoy that way so much more. However, I was not expecting May and June to be such huge reading months, and honestly just such good reading months as well. So if you can't tell from the ginormous stack of books behind me, we have quite a bit to talk about today, and I'm honestly so excited. So let's go ahead and jump into my May and June reading wrap-up. Okay, real quick, let's go over my stats for May. In May, I read a total of 13 books. 6 of those were romance, 3 were fantasy, and 4 were lit fic. Some of these I did read on my Kindle, so I do not have the physical copy, but majority of them I have the physical copy for because I'm really trying to get through my physical TBR this year, even though it keeps growing somehow. But first book I read in May was The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, and I enjoyed this for what it was. I typically really love Christina Lauren's writing. However, this book did not hit for me. Just something was really missing in the storyline. Like, I enjoyed the concept, especially the mix of science and like DNA based matches, and also like the romance aspect. I thought that was a good mix and I liked that concept. However, the characters were just not believable to me, and I really just couldn't see the connection between them. They just did not do it for me, and I did not believe the romance at all, which is like a big part in my ratings. If I don't think the romance is believable and natural, that usually affects my rating the most. And I just did not feel the chemistry and the romance with these characters that strongly. So because of that, I did end up giving this book 3 stars. Overall, it was a fun time. It was a book I enjoyed. I just don't think it's my favorite by this author. And then I did go on to read the sequel, I think in either late May or June, but that one also didn't hit for me that much either. We'll talk about that one later though. And the next book I want to talk about is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is such a beautiful memoir, and it really went into like how dysfunctional her parents were and how they often put like their wants and desires over the basic needs and like safety of their children. And I feel like it was just a very raw and honest memoir, but it was also beautifully written in my opinion. And I just feel like I connected a lot to the overall story and messages in this memoir. And I loved how, like, as the reader, I got to see it from Jeanette's perspective, but at the same time, she, like, has these rose-colored glasses on to where this is just, like, what she expects is normal. While as the reader, you know that, like, this is quite dysfunctional. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very moving story, especially when you pull back the many layers to it, not just in the characters and the circumstances, but also some of the underlying messages as well. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars, but I would definitely recommend checking this book out. And then I picked up The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, and unfortunately this book was a big disappointment for me. I really loved the concept of it. It just did not really play out how I thought it was going to, and I feel like the story really drug on for so long for no good reason. But we're basically following Nella, who marries this rich merchant and moves to his house in Amsterdam. And then she starts receiving these mini like replicas of the house and like the rooms in the house, and they all have like these cryptic notes attached to them. So like in theory, really cool concept, but I feel like our characters were just really annoying, and it really just drug on for no good reason, and like it was really hard to understand like what was going on all the time. And I feel like it was just really stagnant, and the conversations were kind of boring. Our characters were really unlikable and really annoying. Like, I feel like sometimes I really love an unlikable character, but these characters were just so unlikable and so boring. And then there's like never really a big reveal, and like the miniaturist is never really explained. So overall, I just didn't enjoy it. The plot dragged out way more than it needed to, and it just didn't feel worth it at the end. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars. And then I ended up reading Dolly All the Time by Annabelle Monaghan. This was actually an arc from NetGalley, and I really enjoyed this book. One thing that this author does so well is the way that she writes her children characters. They're never like annoying or in the way, because I don't typically like to read romances when they have children in them as well. It kind of just like cringes me out, especially because like the way I read different voices for every character, so like I don't like doing the voice of children in my books. However, Annabelle Monaghan knows how to write like single mom tropes so well, but in this book specifically we are following Dolly and Stuart, who kind of have this like fake dating arrangement going on, and I just feel like they worked really well together. Their banter was so good, the vibe they had together was just so natural, and Stuart was such a sweetheart and it had all the good summer feels. However, I feel like there were a couple of slow spots where conversation kind of dragged a little bit and I had a hard time wanting to pick the book up a couple of times. And then I also didn't really care for the third act breakup at the end. In my opinion, everything was going so well until the third act breakup. The third act breakup in this book, like our main character, it felt so out of character for him, and like it just felt really immature, and that's not what he was giving the entire book. So for that to just be pulled out of nowhere at the end, I didn't really like that because that just did not feel like our character. It felt very out of character for him. So that was kind of two things that were holding me back a little bit, but I did end up giving this book 3.5 stars. I did really enjoy it. I would definitely recommend it. I loved the summery feels and the way that the single mom trope was done, and also just the romance as well was so good. I just did not care for those two things. And then I picked up Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I wouldn't say I either loved or hated this book, and I feel like when I take a step back, I can see what it was trying to do. But overall, I feel like nothing was really happening and the narrative tones felt kind of flat for me. Our characters were also really hard to root for. They were very awkward and depressed, and it kind of just fell flat for me. I didn't like the way that it dragged. And I feel like Sally Rooney just has this weird mix of like obtuse and lyrical writing, and it doesn't mix well sometimes in my opinion. But at its core, it's a story about four people and what they are struggling with and wrestling with internally. And in my opinion, what I took away from this book is that it was trying to say that there's still beauty in the everyday moment. It's just easy to overlook that when you get so consumed with everyday things and like everything that's going on. It's really easy to like miss the beauty in everyday like casual moments, which I love that concept, and I think that's a beautiful outlook. However, I just did not connect to the characters and the plot did not progress in a forward way for me that I would have been liked. However, I love that concept. I just did not really connect to the characters, and I found the characters really hard to root for. There were moments that I really enjoyed, and then there was moments where it's like, come on, get to the point. But overall, I just did not really connect to it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I picked up 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. I really wanted to enjoy this book because I enjoyed The Hating Game by this author. However, this book just did not do it for me. I feel like the romance lacked chemistry, our characters were underdeveloped, and it was very lustful over like actual romance. I also feel like the pacing dragged a lot and the dialogue felt so forced. And one of my biggest turnoffs with rom-com books is when the conflict doesn't make any sense and it's like feels manufactured, like it doesn't actually make any sense, and like the only reason that there is a conflict is for the sake of the plot. I really don't like that. It actually annoys me so bad and it takes me out of the story almost every time, and I feel like the conflict in this book felt so manufactured. So like that, with on top of everything else that I already didn't like, I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I picked up Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors, and I actually really enjoyed this book. It follows Cleopatra and Frankenstein's whirlwind marriage, but it quickly becomes a lens through which we explore loneliness, addiction, and mental health problems. And basically our two main characters, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, they kind of get married on a whim, and it quickly shows the consequences of getting married out of pure passion and impulse, and shows how that relationship will inevitably fracture once the excitement fades and real life sets in. But I really enjoyed it. The characters were quite unlikable at times, but in the most like interesting way and like the most human way. Like they were never at their best. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I feel like she did a really good job at painting the scene and making me feel what the characters were feeling. My only thing is that oftentimes it would lose momentum with the multiple perspective shifts. I feel like some side characters felt more compelling and interesting than the actual like central relationship in this book. Not that I would go into this book expecting a like romantic relationship in any ways, because it is far from that. But if you're looking for a more intimate character study with imperfect characters and like moving observations about life and adulthood, I would definitely recommend checking this book out. I also really enjoyed the writing, and I would love to pick up more books by this author as well. But overall, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. And then I picked up The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. I don't want to talk too much about this one, but I did absolutely loved it. I loved how it picked up with Kavoth's story and how every page just felt so intentional and beautiful, and I love these characters so much. I feel like I've talked about this book so many times before. Overall, this is probably one of my favorite epic fantasy series that I've ever read, and I love the way that the story progressed in the second book. And despite its length, I never felt bored. I was fully entertained the whole time, and I feel like there are just so many stories inside of the story, so I really enjoyed it. But if you also want to hear more of my thoughts on this book, I did do a really in-depth like reading vlog with it a couple of months ago, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, go check out that video. But regardless, I did end up giving this book 5 stars. And then I picked up the Grimm and Oro Dueling Editions, which is basically just a novella for Oro and a novella for Grimm. And I feel like it was a fun addition to the series. I won't say that it added too much. I will say we got some backstory with Grimm and Oro and their parents and also their history a little bit. However, I feel like it didn't really add too much to the overall story. I will say that getting Grimm's perspective added a lot of emotional depth to his character for me, and also just getting to see from his perspective him falling for Isla was probably my favorite thing about this book. I feel like Oro's story mostly didn't really contribute that much extra information, but overall it was a fun time, so it was a 4-star read to me. And then I picked up the rulebook by Sarah Adams, which I enjoyed, but ultimately it fell somewhere in the middle for me. It was a fun, easy read with entertaining banter, good chemistry, and I really enjoyed the premise as well, but I feel like it's just missing something for me. I enjoyed the characters and the overall like second chance romance aspect, but my biggest issue was that the relationship felt a lot more physically driven rather than like a genuine connection, especially because it was a second chance romance. I kind of wanted a lot more like yearning than that, because like while their chemistry was obvious, I just struggled to believe that there was actually a romantic connection there, because we didn't get to see very moments of them being emotional kind of outside of that physical bond. However, the story was enjoyable, fun, very cute read. I love a second chance romance. This one just did not do it for me, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I picked up A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so charming and magical, and I loved the whimsical atmosphere, especially with the concept of a storybook town that blurs the lines between fiction and reality. But either way, I loved our characters. I feel like they had such good banter, especially because they kind of got off to an awkward start. They got off on the wrong foot, and that always makes for the best tension in my opinion. But overall, it was so cute. I really enjoyed it, and I really loved the ending as well. I feel like it added so much more emotional depth because our characters like had their own things going on. So overall, I really enjoyed it, and I did end up giving this book 5 stars. I also talked more about this one in a recent reading vlog as well. And then I picked up Silver Elite by Danny Francis, and I'm not gonna lie, this book low-key exceeded my expectations. I feel like I was hooked from the very first chapter, and I really enjoyed the like dystopian setting of this book. I feel like it was something that I hadn't read before, given like the military training camp environment gave such a tense competitive atmosphere that kept me so intrigued the entire time. And one of my favorite parts was the concept of the Aberneth, which are the ones who have like silver veins and they have like magical abilities. I feel like that added so much intrigue to the world, and I loved slowly uncovering the secrets of these characters. The world building also felt very immersive without feeling overwhelming, and the romance blended in so well to like the overall plot and like conflicts of the story. You know I'm a sucker for enemies to lovers, and this one delivered. The tension between these two characters was so well done. I literally loved their witty banter so much, and watching them go from like challenging each other and not trusting each other to slowly building this relationship, it made the relationship feel so earned and so much more natural, and their chemistry definitely had me smiling through so many scenes. I feel like the pacing was fantastic. It had the perfect balance of action, mystery, and romance without feeling slow. So overall, it was a solid dystopian romance, and I ended up giving this book 5 stars as well. And then for the last book in May, I ended up picking up The Roughest Draft by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Broca. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little hesitant going into this book because I had tried to pick it up a few different times, but I'm so glad that I finally did because I really enjoyed it. I love books about like books and about fictional authors, and in this book our two main characters, they were co-writers before, and they kind of have this complicated history, and they kind of left things on rocky terms, but they are obligated to come back together and write the final book to fulfill their contract. And overall it was just a really fun read. They had such witty banter, they had tension, years built of tension from previous writing sessions together. And I also really loved the pacing of this book. I feel like our characters were very intentional, and I love how they took their times to figure things out and get back to each other. And I found myself both invested in the story that they're writing as well as like their second chance romance. I also read this at the pool, a really good pool book, I will say. But overall, I ended up giving this book 4 stars, and that is the last book that I read in the month of May. Now let's move on to the books that I read in June. I will say that June is probably the best reading month I'll ever have. I ended up reading a total of 16 books in June, so let me go grab those. Okay, like I said, I read a total of 16 books in June, 3 of which were romance, 3 fiction, 4 mystery, 3 fantasy, and 3 classics. So the first one I read was A Room with a View by Emily Forrester, and I actually started this a couple of months ago, but I ended up finishing it in June, and I really just didn't really care for this book that much. I feel like it was all over the place. I loved the overall idea of it, but I did not feel myself connecting to the writing or to the characters, and I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And then I picked up To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This is a story that follows this family's visit to their summertime family house, and I just didn't really care for it. I feel like the lack of plot made it really hard for me to stay engaged with the story, because the way that Virginia Woolf writes, now that I can tell because I've read 2 of her books, is that she does a very stream of consciousness style, and I just didn't really care for it. It was really hard for me to like care for any of the characters and like what was actually going on, and it was hard for me to like be emotionally invested in the story. So despite admiring the themes and the prose of the story, I didn't really connect to it that much, and it wasn't one that I personally enjoyed. And I also ended up giving this book 3 stars. And then I also picked up Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and honestly, same thing. I didn't really care too much for the stream of conscious writing style, and I feel like I was just really bored throughout the whole story. This one, I will say, I enjoyed a bit more than To the Lighthouse. I just feel like I enjoyed the characters and like the setting and the idea a little more, because basically the story follows Clarissa Dalloway as she prepares the whole day for this party. And while she's preparing for the party, she's reflecting on like her past and relationships, and also just like her life, and like the thought of like, what if she had chosen a different way. So I enjoyed that a little more than To the Lighthouse, but still I did not like the stream of conscious writing style, and it was hard to connect to the characters, and I just feel like there was a lack of plot moving forward. So I also ended up giving this book 3 stars as well. I don't think Virginia Woolf is for me. These are like the 2 big ones that I've heard of, and I just really didn't care for her writing style. It was really hard to keep up with everything that was going on, even though there was like literally nothing going on. So 3 stars for both of these. And then I picked up The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. This one follows Millie as she starts a new housekeeping job, and it doesn't take long for things to start going sideways. I really enjoyed this book. This one actually kept me like really intrigued the whole time, especially the ending. I love the way that Frida McFadden does her endings. Like there's always some unexpected twist at the end, and this one was no exception. I had a really fun time with it. I was really engaged, and I'm loving this series so much. I can't wait to finish it, and I think this one's also being made into a movie as well, so can't wait for that to come out. But I did end up giving this book 4 stars. And then I also picked up The Tenant by Frida McFadden, another fast-paced, incredible, bingeable book by her. And this one especially was so fun. It definitely kept me on my toes, and I really did not expect like who it was going to be at the end. So that was crazy and a really good twist. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And then I picked up Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This was such a sweet and emotional romance, Basically, we're following two doctors who don't really get off on the right foot, and then they unexpectedly become friends through these letters that kind of starts as an arrangement and it slowly develops into something deeper. But I loved how the relationship was built on friendship, communication, and just overall genuine care for each other. And I feel like Abby Jimenez always does a really good job at balancing humor, romance, and heavier topics. And it always makes her romances feel more heartfelt and like incredibly easy to connect to. So I really enjoyed this book and I loved the letters. The letters were so cute. And also the MMC in this book has anxiety, so I always love an anxiety representation. But either way, the characters got along so well. Like their chemistry was so good, the banter was so good, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. And then I picked up Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I love this book. I thought it was an excellent follow-up to Ninth House. Somehow the world building became even richer, the stakes were higher, the mysteries were so much more complex, and everything. I just really enjoyed this book. I love spending time with Alex and the rest of the cast. Basically, in this book, Alex returns to Yale and she is determined to rescue Darlington from hell or like whatever portal he went through. And overall, it was just a really fun read. I feel like Leigh Bardugo does such a good job at blending fantasy and horror and mystery into this like one big compelling story. And also the romance, I was not expecting that, but that had me so intrigued and I cannot wait for the 3rd book to come out in the series this year. I'm so excited because the way that this book ended, oh, I was gagged. It was so good. Overall, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I would definitely recommend checking out Ninth House if you haven't read that yet though. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I also picked up The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. This one I really just did not care for. I did not care for our characters and like the idea of our main characters being romantically involved but also like producing this dating show together. It just didn't work for me and I did not care for it, so I ended up giving this book 2 stars. And then I picked up The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I absolutely love this book. I thought the concept was so unique and like the overall story was so compelling. I loved getting to read about Addie's journey and how like her challenges with the curse and everything. And also the romance was so good. It was so tender but also bittersweet because of the curse. But I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a really fun, heartfelt read and also a really compelling story as well. I feel like V. Schwab just has this really beautiful writing without it feeling overdone or like overcomplicated, which I really enjoy that. And I also love how it was dual timeline, how we got to see like all the years that she's had to live and also like how she got the curse and everything, and then also the present day of her living with the curse and meeting somebody and how nobody ever remembers her. I thought it was such a good compelling read and I really enjoyed it, so I ended up giving this book 4 stars. And then I picked up The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. I really enjoyed this one. However, it wasn't really what I was expecting. I went into this one expecting it to be a fast-paced thriller, but I feel like we ended up focusing a lot more on the relationship between Hannah and her stepdaughter rather than like the mystery itself. Because in the story, Hannah's husband suddenly disappears and he leaves a note telling her to protect his teenage daughter. So while I appreciated the emotional aspects of the story, I do wish that the overall like mystery had a lot more suspense to it and like a lot more payoff as well. But overall, it was an engaging read, even if it didn't deliver on the thriller side, but I wish we would have got a little more suspense. So because of that, I did end up giving this book 3 stars. I have started the TV show for it as well, and I will say that I'm enjoying the show a lot more than the book. And then I picked up We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and unfortunately, this book was just not for me. I feel like I was waiting for something significant to happen like the entire book, and then we get like this twist at the end, and it just did not have the same like payoff that I wanted it to. So I just didn't really care for the story, and I was kind of bored for the majority of it. Let's just say it. Let's just say it how it is. I was bored. I was bored for the majority of this book, so I just didn't like it, and I ended up giving this book 2 stars. And then I picked up The Life Impossible by Matt Haig. I enjoyed this book for what it was. Basically, we're following Grace, a retired teacher who unexpectedly inherits a house from her friend in Ibiza. And throughout the book, she starts to discover that her friend and the island have a lot more mysteries than she thought. And I thought this book was okay. I feel like Matt Haig has a beautiful writing style, and I really appreciated the atmosphere, the suspense, and like the way that the story slowly uncovered some of these mysteries. However, I just had a hard time connecting to the main character, which made it difficult for me to be emotionally invested in the story. And for that reason, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And then I picked up The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This is a story following 6 powerful magicians who were selected to compete for a place in this like secret society. I really enjoyed this one. I feel like I was never bored when I was with the 6 initiates. And I feel like they all had distinct like personalities and motivations. And they also were very like morally gray as well. And I feel like that made their interactions so fascinating to watch. And I especially loved the like shifting power dynamics in the characters. And I feel like it was like really hard to know who to trust. And I love that like overall suspense to that, and like not knowing who to trust with the characters. Like as the reader, I feel like that is just so fun. It is also a series. There's 2 more books in the series that I need to continue. But overall, it was a fun, character-driven fantasy with complex relationships and some psychological tension as well. So if you enjoy any of that stuff, I would definitely recommend checking this book out. I also really enjoyed the magic system in this book. I loved the magical abilities and how everybody had something different and it was kind of secretive. So overall, I enjoyed it and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. And then I also picked up The Atlas Paradox, which is the 2nd book in that series. And I feel like I enjoyed that one equally as much as the 1st book. I love how the story continued and like where it picked up. I feel like we're also getting a lot more plot action and plot development in the 2nd book, mixed with a lot more like character shifting dynamics. So I really enjoyed that one too. And I definitely have a lot more questions than answers after finishing the 2nd book. So I really need to continue and finish that series out because I'm just so intrigued to figure out how it all plays off. And I ended up giving the 2nd book 4 stars as well. And then I picked up Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. This was such a beautiful and emotional story. I honestly became completely invested in Angel's journey and found myself so attached to these characters. Like all of the characters, even the littlest side character, like played such a big part in the story. And I feel like their struggles felt so real, and I was honestly rooting for them from the beginning. But I also loved the way that it took its time, and like the relationship had so many like struggles and tests, and it really paid off at the end. And she never really like exploited the heavier topics. I feel like she handled them really well and like tied them into the story really well. But overall, I feel like the story was about healing and redemption and honestly trusting God's plan and God's timing to the T. I really enjoyed it, and I feel like this is a book that will stick with me for a really long time, and I would definitely recommend this one as well. And I also ended up giving this book 5 stars. And then the last book I picked up in June was The Grace Year by Kim Lidgett. This book is set in a society that believes that teenage girls possess a dangerous magic, and so they're banished for a year to kind of survive on their own. And I enjoyed it. However, I don't think I connected too much to our characters. I really enjoyed the like dystopian premise, and the world was really interesting, especially the way that it like explored fear and power and like the treatment of women. I feel like the atmosphere was so tense, and I really appreciated like the social commentary woven throughout the story. And while it didn't work completely for me, I can definitely see why so many people love this book. I feel like it just kind of dragged at certain paces for me. So overall, I enjoyed it. I had a good time reading it. I love the idea of this story, but something was missing for me. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. That was a lot of books to talk about. I literally started this book when it was still light out. It is now nighttime, but that does wrap up all of the books that I read in May and June. I feel like I had a pretty good couple months of reading there. We had some 5-star reads as well as some disappointments. Overall, I feel like that was a couple of successful reading months, if you ask me. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts on them are, or if there's any books that you would love to see me read in the future. Make sure to comment those down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!